Welcome back to another edition of the Magic Latest Podcast, the podcast where we discuss everything Orlando Magic basketball. I'm your host, Jalon Dixon, and today we got a couple of things to get into, but before we get started, remember to like, comment, and subscribe for daily Orlando Magic content. We are on the road to 1,000 subscribers and trying to become one of the biggest Orlando Magic podcasts here on the YouTube platform. So remember to hit that post notification bell so you always know when we're dropping new videos. And let's go ahead and get right into today's episode. Couple of interesting nuggets of information we're going to go through on today's podcast. One of them starts with our guys over at Orlando Magic Daily. Shout out to those guys who pointed out a very interesting set of statistics that I thought was kind of important because it dates back to a little bit of a quote-unquote hot take that I had before the season started. What was that hot take, you might ask, for those who are new listeners or for those who forgot? I said that I believe that Anthony Black will be the biggest X factor of any player on this team this season. Not another leap from Franz Wagner, not an MVP jump for Paulo Banchero, not Tristan da Silva showing us that the way he played in Eurobasket was real, not finding out that Wendell Carter Jr. is the second coming of Anthony Davis. Nope, I didn't say all of that. I said that Anthony Black, our backup point guard, behind Jalen Suggs, who I believed actually was going to get a lot of tick due to the fact that Jalen Suggs was and has been protected by not playing back-to-backs and not playing heavy minutes when he has been on the floor, was going to be the biggest needle mover in terms of helping this team get things back on track. Well, it's funny that it worked out that way because guess what? The stats actually say that he is just as important as I thought he was, if not more. Peep this. Orlando Magic Daily Stats pull-up says that in the Magic's 7 wins this season, Black averages 10.7 points per game, but shoots 41.7% from 3. In their 6 losses, Black averages 10.3 points per game, but shoots only 20% from 3. There was a similar correlation last year. Black shot 40.8% in wins and 21.7% in losses. Goes on to say Black has greatly improved his ability to attack the basket and find different ways to score, but teams are still happy leaving him open. When he is a consistent three-point threat, the Magic are simply a different team. And that is what Orlando needs to see grow. That is what Orlando needs to see grow during the next 3 months. The Magic may simply go as Black goes and how quickly Black develops. That could determine the direction of their trade strategy. We'll talk about trade strategy a little bit later on, actually on the next segment when we talk about what Bleacher Report did recently. But that's neither here nor there. Anthony Black and his jump statistically, mainly from a three-point shooting standpoint, was the most interesting aspect of this year for me because he seems like somebody that when you pair a 6'8" to 6'9" frame, his ability to guard multiple positions in space, both on ball and in zone, and be somebody that has the physical capabilities athletically to get to the paint, get good paint touches, be an aggressive driver, be somebody that we've seen a handful of times, including that game against Houston, that he has the ability offensively to be someone you can rely on to give you quote-unquote instant offense. He has the ability to be someone that off your bench is a legitimate two-way player. But the three-point shooting swing is the biggest difference in him being a player that can elevate this roster or simply be somebody that kind of floats around and just happens to stick. We are looking for Anthony Black to make the kind of jump that Tristan da Silva has made as a three-point shooter this season. For those who are not aware of what Tristan da Silva has been able to do so far this season, Tristan da Silva is shooting the ball very well from beyond the arc so far this year, and he is another one of those players that I said before the season started is somebody that if his three-point shooting comes along, it's going to mean a lot for this Magic team who's still trying to figure out what their overall inside-out game looks like. Who are they reliable to shoot three-point shooters? Who are the guys they know they can trust in three-point situations on the corners, at the top of the key, late in games like that situation against the Portland Trail Blazers where they drew the play up for Paolo Banchero, when everybody knew that the ball probably should have been seeing Desmond Bane's hands, just statistically speaking. But so far this season, Tristan da Silva, 40.6% from beyond the arc on 4.9 three-point attempts per game so far this season. For context, obviously we saw beforehand that in games where Anthony Black is really on one, he's still averaging about 10 points, but he's doing it on 40% shooting from beyond the arc. I'm not saying that Anthony Black has to be a 40% three-point shooter in order for him to be considered as this real X factor for this team in terms of like moving the needle so far ahead. He doesn't have to be 40% in order to be able to make that kind of impact. It's showing in the statistics as it is. In the games where this team has won, he has shot the ball significantly better. And the difference between 40 and 20% is so vast that if he can even be somewhere in the middle, preferably closer to 40%, but somewhere in the middle, closer to your third or closer, let's say not the middle, because the middle is about where he is right now on the season. Let's say if he can be about a 36 or 37% three-point shooter for the season, that will reflect in the win column for this Orlando Magic team. I feel it genuinely because of the fact that I also think he's going to get ample opportunity. I think that this idea of the Jalen Suggs experiment in terms of kind of playing it safe with him, I don't think that's something that's just going to stick to the rest of 2025. I think they are going to kind of address this situation with kid gloves throughout the entirety of the regular season, which means there's going to be a lot of opportunity for Anthony Black to get starts at point guard. And I think he is going to have to be not only more aggressive as a scorer as he already has been to start this season, but he also is going to have to be more available as a three-point shooter. As the article mentions, people are not afraid to let him shoot from beyond the arc wide open. We talked about it a few episodes ago that a lot of teams are not afraid to let the Orlando Magic shoot wide open threes because Orlando has not punished them enough, if at all, for allowing so many open looks. Anthony Black has the chance to really exploit a lot because of the fact that there are players around him that command so much attention. And if he can be a knockdown three-point shooter paired with what he can do on as a driver and on the defensive end, I mean, there's a real world where we have to start having a conversation about Anthony Black versus Jalen Suggs moving forward in the starting lineups. As much as I love Jalen Suggs as an all-NBA caliber defender and what I know he can bring to the table, I think the injury concerns of Jalen Suggs, they don't put him in the same breath as when we talk about Jonathan Isaac being on a minutes restriction. But he's somebody that you do feel this weird innate need to protect because this is something that he's dealt with dating back to AAU, back at AAU in high school, back when he played with Minnehaha with Chet Holmgren in high school. He dealt with lower extremity issues all throughout high school, especially as a two-way athlete because he also played football. I know a lot of Orlando Magic people used to bring that up early on in his tenure after being drafted, but this is somebody who has dealt with injuries, especially lower extremity injuries, dating back to, his high school career. So this is someone that, although he has a significant upside when healthy, you kind of have to protect him in a sense, which opens up room for more guys like Black to see the floor more frequently, more often. And I think his ability to knock down three-point shot is so much of a needle mover. It's so important that if he can be more of the guy that he is when we win than he is when we lose on a consistent basis, I think it's going to reflect. Is the team going to be undefeated because Anthony Black shoots 40% from beyond the arc? No. But I think that his ability to shoot from beyond the arc is so important because of what it means for the rest of the team in terms of now the kind of attention that Paolo gets, Franz gets, Desmond gets, and now you have to worry about Tristan da Silva as a 40% three-point shooter. Anthony Black is a 40% three-point shooter. The fact that Wendell Carter Jr., despite the fact that everybody is not so big on him, has been somebody that's rebounded the ball really well. So now you have two guys who get to the free throw line at a high clip. One other guy who's been at least decent as an offensive rebounder so far this season. And then you got two other guys on the wing that both can knock down 40% from beyond the arc. That's a recipe for winning basketball and a high octane offense. So shout out to the guys at the Orlando Magic Daily again. And again, reinforcing this belief, man. I keep saying it. Anthony Black, I think, is going to be so important for the Orlando Magic this season. And that three ball, I think if it comes along by January, this Orlando Magic team is going to be, they're going to be viewed the way they should be in the national media, which is a team that is going to challenge for the Eastern Conference title. Next up, speaking of getting a knockdown three-point shooter, Bleacher Report recently put together their article where they broke down what every single team in the NBA would do as far as a trade target if the NBA trade deadline was right now. And ladies and gentlemen, again, not to toot my own horn here, but one of the guys that we've brought up on this podcast more than a handful of times, and you guys have seconded this in the comment section down below, we need to get a high-volume three-point shooter. We need to get a high-volume off-the-bench scorer to help boost this offense. And guess who the name was? The name we've all mentioned more than a handful of times, Sacramento Kings' very own Malik Monk. Let me read out exactly the trade package and some of the logic here. The trade, Jonathan Isaac, Jet Howard, a 2026 second-round pick, and a 2028 second-round pick to the Sacramento Kings for Malik Monk. The logic, Orlando spent heavily this offseason on offensive improvements. There's clearly more work to be done. The Magic ranked 19th in offensive efficiency and remain both bottom third in both three-point makes and percentage. While they can't really afford another big splurge, a discounted deal for Monk might work. He's streaky and overpaid a bit, but he could get hot enough to tilt a playoff outcome or two. Assuming there isn't just something in the Orlando water behind all of this bricklaying, Desmond Bane and Tyus Jones can't shoot now, Monk could help open things up for this oft-congested offense. Now, there was something that was very interesting mentioned at the back portion of that explanation, which is whether or not this is just universally an Orlando Magic three-point shooting problem. Again, when you talk about the Monstars taking away the star players' powers, putting them in the ball, and then turning into superhero Hulks, that's kind of what's happened to a handful of the quote-unquote knockdown shooters that have supposedly came through Orlando. Obviously, in most recent memory, KCP was one of those guys. Desmond Bane is looking like one of those guys. And Trey Jones, who's a career 37+% three-point shooter, also is struggling to shoot the ball right now. Now, thankfully, one thing that Malik Monk does very differently than all three of those guys, and I would say arguably does better than two of the three as opposed to Desmond Bane, who I think when he's hot, when he's on one, I think is a little bit better than Malik at this, is Malik's ability to create shots off the dribble. Malik is so dangerous as an offensive weapon because he operates in such a six-man mentality, I think. It is very much gangbusters. Go out there. I know that I have about 20 to 25 minutes a night where I just need to find my rhythm as quickly as possible and get the ball in the basket at ease as frequently as humanly possible. Your typical six-man of the year type candidates that we've seen from years past that tend to be offensive centric, your Lou Williams, your Jamal Crawfords, those type that are the offensive go-getters. This is what Malik Monk, this is what Malik Monk embodies, and thankfully he would assimilate so well with this Orlando Magic roster. He would gel so much with what they need because definitively, and I've said this dating all the way back to the offseason, even after the Desmond Bane acquisition, even after the Tyus Jones acquisition, even after drafting Jace Richardson, I said I don't necessarily know how definitively we feel about this rotation as far as having a backup shooting guard that you can trust to give the ball and be able to quote unquote carry an offense when guys like Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner, and Desmond Bane are off the floor. You're positioned in a way because with that two guard spot being so wishy-washy, because you're either asking Anthony Black to play the two next to Tyus Jones, or you're positioning yourself where you're always going to have to stagger some version of either Franz Wagner or Desmond Bane to play that pseudo two position, or bump Tristan da Silva to the two and have Franz Wagner stagger as the three on that second unit. You're always positioning yourself where you kind of have to have a star or one of the big three, let's say, on the floor at all times. And that depth only gets more questionable in games where you go without Jalen Suggs, a la the game against Houston where the team went without Paolo and Jalen Suggs and likely could end up having a similar situation happen again against Golden State. I think Jalen Suggs will play, but of course he's still on a minutes count. With all that being said, Malik Monk is somebody that, again, fits the archetype. We've said it a million times, and you guys have reiterated in the comment section. So I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but your Malik Monk, Russell Westbrook, Victor Oladipo. There's a handful of these like guys that I think fit the archetype of what it is that this Orlando Magic team needs. And I think that Bleacher Report kind of captured this one very similarly to a lot of what we've been saying here on the podcast and in the comment section. I think this is a good identification of like what Orlando Magic fans feel, which is, yes, obviously this team needs 3-point shooting help, and anybody who can provide that initial change alone by bringing in somebody who can be a high volume 3-point shooter is helpful. But more so than anything, identifying a talent like Malik Monk is not just grabbing a knockdown 3-point shooter, because if that were the case, why wouldn't, let's say we still stick with the Kings, why wouldn't Keon Ellis, who's a much cheaper, much maybe easier contract to trade for, given how low his salary is, paired with the fact that he seems to have real struggles getting on the floor for the Sacramento Kings team, because regardless of if it's Doug Christie or Mike Brown previously, it seems like he just can't seem to get real action consistently on a night-to-night basis. If we just need a knockdown 3-point shooter who could also add a little bit more defense, why wouldn't we just go get Keon Ellis? The reasoning for going after someone like Malik as opposed to Keon has more to do with his overall shot creation ability, not just being able to add another guy who can knock the 3-ball down. Actually, in the comment section down below, you guys let me know. And hey, we'll know the real ball watchers when it comes to this. I'm not saying that you would be wrong for going against Keon, but I do think that Keon Ellis is an interesting trade target. And we talked about this in the summer, actually, as an interesting guy for the very same reason of the fact that he kind of seems like he's been stuffed in the, the bottom portion of that rotation. And he's a guy who I think can be really, really successful in a situation where he gets to be a knockdown 3-point shooter, gets to be able to guard and defend at a high level, play up-tempo pace, and be able to be like, another, not Anthony Black necessarily, but somebody who is kind of asked to do a very similar thing, just with the ball in his hands a little less. So you guys let me know in the comment section down below, which one would you rather do if we're talking about just targeting a trade asset like on a team like the Sacramento Kings? Would you rather go on a bigger swing where you'd have to give up a lot more salary and probably a lot more draft capital, in this case 2 second-round picks, to go after getting Malik Monk? Or would you rather move off of somebody like Jet Howard and a 2nd-round pick, or let's say Jet Howard and a 2nd-round pick, or let's say Jet Howard and Tyus Jones and a 2nd-round pick to go after somebody like Keon Ellis? I could see the argument for either. The cheaper option might not have the same level of upside that the more expensive option is, such as everything in life, right? You get what you pay for. So essentially, the more you're willing to spend, the likelihood that you get a good ROI, return on investment, tends to play in your favor. But I could also see a world where being able to get a significantly cheaper contract that still fits and still puts you in position with a player like that on timeline, because he fits right in from a culture standpoint as well, in terms of where he is age-wise with the rest of this young Orlando Magic roster. It could be a really good opportunity. On the other end, this team might just need a little bit more veterans. We talked about that in the past with the Draymond Green comment from a while back. Maybe it's one of those things where, if we're being real, maybe a guy like Malik Monk being in the room goes even deeper than just his on-the-court productivity, and it can bring in things like the fact that he has played in this league for quite some time. He has been a successful offensive option in this league for quite some time, and he has played next to some very talented and important players throughout his time in the NBA. So maybe he provides a little bit extra just beyond the on the floor in comparison to Keon Ellis. But again, you also got to think about how much bread this team has, because realistically, the Orlando Magic can't even sign a minimum player until January. So all of the kind of movement that's going to take place as far as roster changes for the Orlando Magic, all are going to come down to like money availability and what they're willing to part ways with. So we'll see. But you guys let me know in the comment section down below what you guys think and who you think would be an interesting trade target for the Orlando Magic. Next up, let's talk about something that I thought was kind of interesting, which was on FanDuel TV. Wendell Carter Jr. was featured on the podcast Run It Back, and he had an interesting comment about why he feels that Paulo Banchero and Franz Wagner do not get the kind of love from the national media that they deserve, quite frankly, for what they're able to do statistically on a night-to-night basis. And he says, I think it's just a small market team that we're in. Just being down here in Orlando, even Paulo, in my opinion, doesn't get the coverage that, I think he deserves. So in my opinion, I just blame the market. Those guys are putting up phenomenal numbers, for the past 2 or 3 years. They've turned this franchise around, so I'm just going to blame it on that. Basically, long-winded way of saying that they don't get the kind of national recognition that they deserve because of the mere fact that they play in a small market. And we've seen this in a handful of different iterations, right? Before Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was on a real MVP trail, there was always a little bit of an underrated tag for Shai. The same thing could be said for someone like Jokic once upon a time. Before Jokic won an NBA championship, I think the idea of him being the greatest player in the NBA right now, and him being the guy that would, kind of set the standard or set a new standard for what, even, an MVP looks like from a statistical standpoint. He wasn't getting the kind of love that he probably deserved until that championship run. Shoot, that entire Denver Nuggets championship run, I think most NBA analysts were picking the Nuggets to lose in nearly every series they played in. Despite the fact that they were the most dominant regular season team that year, had one of the best starting fives in NBA history, and eventually did go on to win the championship. There's a handful of guys that tend to fall into that category. I think up until this season, I think Detroit with Cade Cunningham, he was somebody that, because of the lack of team success, was flying a bit under the radar. And now you have analysts calling him the second best player in the Eastern Conference behind Giannis, right? Someone else that I felt like is another interesting situation for this. Damian Lillard arguably should have more all-star appearances than he's had in his career, if you also look at how many times he's made the All-NBA team. But I think him playing in a smaller market like the Portland Trailblazers hurt him in a lot of situations where, statistically, when it came down to more than just, a popularity contest, he was voted as one of the top 15 players in the NBA a multitude of different seasons. But when it came down to a popularity contest, things like the All-Star game, he missed it more times than he probably deserved to, simply because I feel like a lot of people aren't watching Portland Trailblazers basketball. So I think that you can make a similar argument for the Orlando Magic. Obviously, they're not your New York, your LAs, your Golden State, and that puts them at a bit of a disadvantage, especially in a league nowadays that, even though it's star-driven, also tends to be very heavily favored towards the West Coast area. I would say especially this season, given the fact that the Eastern Conference, it has its own really great storylines, obviously. Cade Cunningham with the Detroit Pistons, the fact that the Chicago Bulls, despite their little rickety stretch these last couple of games, have been a really interesting story this season. The start for the Philadelphia 76ers, the fact that the Milwaukee Bucks look competent despite the fact that their roster looks like they shouldn't be nearly as good as they're playing this season. Like, there's more than enough storylines to cling on to if you're focusing to Eastern Conference basketball. But the stigma around the East this year coming into the season really has hurt the overall focus of the NBA, where if they were already focused on teams like the Clippers, the Lakers, the Warriors, and teams like that before, I mean, it's only gotten worse to a certain degree this season when you think about some of the main national coverage, because no one really knows much about how to feel about the Eastern Conference. I mean, even the question marks around a team like the Cleveland Cavaliers, with the fact that Darius Garland starts the year off injured, and he's going to be somebody that they're going to have to kind of work back into the lineup. The New York Knicks just lost OG Anunoby and Jalen Brunson for a period of time now, right? Like, the interest in the Eastern Conference as a whole has been hurt by some of the injuries and stigmas established coming into the season and throughout the beginning of this year. And so it's just teams that tend to lean even more towards the West Coast than it did before. I think Orlando as a market, does hurt them. But I think it also has a lot more to do with the Eastern Conference as a whole. I also think it has to do with the fact that there's still new kids on the block. I think until you see it get put together for more than 1 year, there always going to be a question as to whether or not there's a 1 year flash in the pan, things of that nature, right? When Detroit went from being easily one of the worst teams in basketball the last season, being so competent with bringing in Tobias Harris, Malik Beasley, and Tim Hardaway Jr., and they go on that run and they make the postseason. You had to ask yourself, like, okay, you basically went from worst to first in a way. Not literally from a standings perspective, but considering just how terrible that team was 2 seasons prior, I mean, they basically made one of the biggest jumps we've seen in NBA history from one season to the next, outside of like maybe the Oklahoma City Thunder, right? When you put all that in perspective, realistically, the Orlando Magic have never, at least in the Paolo Banchero era, put 2 good seasons together that led to postseason trips where you saw some kind of upside that said, oh yeah, this team is coming. Like we saw it in that series against Cleveland, but they hobble into the series against Boston where everybody and their mama kind of knew that they were going to get smacked, especially coming off of a season where they just barely finished the season at 500. I mean, they literally finished the season at 500, but just barely finished the season at 500, and we're going up against the reigning NBA champions. So a lot of odds were stacked against them where they weren't even really taken seriously going into that series, and deservingly so. So unlike the Pistons, who have one of the best bounce back seasons we've seen in NBA history last year, and then starts this season off, even with no Jaden Ivey, even with the issues off the floor with Malik Beasley, even with the circumstances of losing guys like Tim Hardaway Jr. in free agency, they're the top team in the Eastern Conference right now, record-wise. And they've done that with having guys like Cade Cunningham and Jalen Duren and Isaiah Stewart on the bench due to injury in a handful of these games. And a handful, not too many, but a handful of these games. So you have to see it more than one season to be able to truly believe it. Even if it's a smaller sample size like this early one, the Orlando Magic were one of the teams that had some of the biggest hype trains pushed for them in the early portion of the summer before, free agency kind of really started to like die down. To start the season off, that same hype did not really reflect outside of the very first game against Miami. And it's just slowly but surely starting to chug back in the right direction. So totally agree with Wendell Carter Jr. to a certain extent. I would say the one part where I would throw a little bit of an asterisk there would be Orlando as an organization is also part of that, because they have to prove it. They have to prove it, because it looks like the Detroit Pistons are going back to the postseason. It looks like the Detroit Pistons should be a higher seed than they were last year when they went to the postseason. What will that look like for the Orlando Magic this year? Will they look more like the team that we saw hobble into the playoffs last season? Or are they going to look more like the team that ended up going up against the Cleveland Cavaliers and pushing them in 7 games and being the team that we thought was one piece away from being able to really make a real run? Only time will tell. Only time will tell. Last but not least, we are going to, as usual, talk about you guys' comments from last podcast. I love reading you guys' comments, and I love reading them even when I'm not doing recording, because they help drive ideas for the podcast in later episodes. So let's start from the top and work our way down this time, since we started from the bottom last time. So if we start at the top, let's start with Gregory Arnold 7510. Shout out to you, boss. Says Kada from Boston or somebody like that. We need a active big that finishes and rim protection, not necessarily an upgrade, but play style change. I think that could be an interesting way to view it. I don't necessarily know if Neemias Queta would even be available. I think there's a comment underneath that from Ephraim Bolden 7892 that says, I don't think that's important. I don't think that's important because we still have Mo. I think the asterisk there would be, well, obviously we don't have Mo this year, and the idea is about maximizing this season. So if it were just simply an idea of getting Mo back in like early January, February, and it was just a lock like that, maybe you'd be a little bit more apprehensive to get somebody that you would essentially be picking up to play over Mo. But if we're saying Mo is healthy, I mean, I think a lot of these conversations about the front court aren't even really talked about nearly as much because I think that Mo Wagner, is somebody who I think would be helping solve a lot of the problems that this team has dealt with early in the season. Neemias Queta is an interesting name, and I think that the big body, burly center, an interesting guy that even if he wasn't playing so rough due to his, slow start injury-wise this season, an interesting fit would be somebody even like a Kevon Looney who's with New Orleans. I always thought that he was kind of a solid, just do whatever you needed him to kind of center back in Golden State. Speaking of Golden State, I think a guy who's kind of fallen out of favor but still kind of gets the minutes kind of because of the fact that they don't have real great depth at that center position, but they play Draymond Green so much at the center position, is Trace Jackson Davis, another guy who I think could be like this above the rim running finisher, somebody that you can ask to play, 10 to 12 minutes a night and just be somebody that you ask to set really hard screens, rim roll really aggressively, and just be the athletic finisher that you want him to be. I mean, I really wish somebody that I think would be a really great fit for this team. And I haven't said this too much on the podcast, but because I'm still kind of like trying to figure out how all of this will make sense because his salary is a little high. Not nasty, but it's a little high. Is John Collins for the LA Clippers. I think John Collins would be a really, really interesting fit for this team because he has a three-point shooting element. He shoots about 35-36% from beyond the arc. He's somebody who is athletic enough to finish around the rim on rim rolls. He's worked next to high-level passers like Trae Young in the past, plays with James Harden now, who could be somebody that works in the pick and roll and could finish like 3 or 4 possessions a game, average like 10 to 13 points with, 3 or 4 rim rolls, a putback finish, and a three-pointer. And somehow we are around the 10 to 12 point a night productivity. And you're like, yo, that's a different element we didn't have before because Goga can shoot the three, but he's not as athletic of a finisher. Wendell Carter Jr. is a big-time rebounder, but he doesn't spread the floor. Jonathan Isaac shoots the three ball at a high volume, but he doesn't hit it at a high enough clip to call him a stretch big. John Collins kind of fits like this archetype in the middle of all of that as this guy who I think could be a really interesting fit and play backup center. I think he could play power forward for you at backup power forward. I think he can play small ball center for you as well. Don't necessarily think he needs to start, but could just be an interesting fit. Just throwing that out there. Don't know if that's exactly a guy that comes to mind for you, Gregory, but you said more of the archetype of a guy who can finish plays and rim protect. I wouldn't call John Collins like a crazy rim protector per se, but I do think that his play style is a little bit more unique to what the Magic have had in the past, and I think that can be actually a good thing, not a bad thing for him. Luis Rosario 9522. Shout out to you, boss. As usual, Chris Middleton would be a good addition for the bench. A championship player who can still produce would be an excellent addition for the second half of the season. Chris Middleton was somebody that was brought up by a commenter last episode. Shout out to bro, by the way. I apologize for not having your comment pulled up right now, but mentioning Chris Middleton as an interesting guy to keep in mind moving forward when we get to the trade deadline as a piece to get both a veteran in the locker room, which addresses the youth issue for the Orlando Magic. He's somebody that is going to be an expiring contract very soon, which makes him kind of an easy get because of the fact that even though you're going to have to pay a relatively pretty penny to a team like Washington in order to get his services, you get a bit of a hometown discount because of the fact that you're positioned in a way to not have to worry about him being this long-term contract. He's somebody that falls off your books. So you're paying for essentially a half a season rental, which brings down the trade package a little bit. And we know what he can do in the postseason as a big-time shot maker. If you're able to bring Chris Middleton off the bench as a definitive 2-guard or play the 3 off the bench for you next to Tristan DeSilva and Anthony. I mean, think about that by itself. Tristan DeSilva, Anthony Black, Chris Middleton, and then you also still have Goga Batadze coming off the bench, and you have someone like Jonathan Isaac, or you could stagger where somewhere in the middle of all of that, you still have a Franz Wagner or a Paulo Banchero within that lineup. I mean, that could be lethal. And we could see a world where Chris Middleton is able to close games. Maybe you close a game with a small ball lineup, or with a jumbo. It depends on how you view it, but a smedium lineup. Let's call it a smedium lineup, where you have, let's say, again, this makes it sound like I'm not very big on Jalen Suggs, but let's say you end games with a smedium lineup where you have Anthony Black at the 1, right? Chris Middleton at the 2, Franz Wagner at the 3, Tristan da Silva at the 4, and Paolo Banchero at the 5. I think that would go insane. Would they have a crazy amount of rim protection? Obviously not. But look at the offensive ability and how fast they would be able to play. There's still multi-positional versatility there from a defensive standpoint. And that would just be a lot of shot making on the floor at one time. That would be a lot of shot making on the floor at one time. You'd have Franz, who's shooting 37% from beyond the arc. You have Tristan, who's shooting 40% from beyond the arc. You have Anthony Black, who I think has the capability to shoot 36 to 37% from beyond the arc. And just to do it on podcast while we're checking this right now, I can tell you that if I'm not mistaken, Chris Middleton is, I don't want to use this season because it's not really a great representation of what he's able to do overall. Chris Middleton is a 38.6% three-point shooter. You would have 4 guys that have the upside of a 36+% three-point shooter on the floor with Paolo Banchero as the middleman in the paint down low. I think that would actually be insane. That's just my personal opinion. Again, you guys let me know in the comment section down below how you feel. Jack H408, I know the right move was to let Cole go for both the franchise and him individually. I just miss him. Talking about Cole Anthony last episode, how he was somebody that it kind of seemed like with the parting of him and a handful of the other guards like DJ Augustine, in favor of going after bringing back Mo Wagner, bringing in Tyus Jones, and obviously making up a little bit of space after bringing in Desmond Bane, that Cole Anthony was a bit of a tough loss. I kind of agree, but I also, like I said in that episode as well, like I felt like the upside for him worked in a way where it does work on both. Can't blame you for missing him, Jack. Can't blame you for missing him. Think he would be a really good offensive punch and somebody that we at least know has that kind of upside to be somebody that can produce off the bench for us. It just, it's just how the money works sometimes. Ephraim Bolden, who actually was referenced in the first comment earlier, dropped his own comment saying I think we could use Bol Bol. In 2025, I'm not so sure how I feel about Bol Bol just because I feel like the sample on Bol is so skewed. I feel like there's no real way to identify where he fits on this roster unless you're just asking him to come out there and be a rim roller and be somebody that occasionally can shoot the 3. I don't know if Bol Bol is really a great fit for where this team is moving forward. But could he be a higher upside version of what we asked Jonathan Isaac to be? I think that's the best case scenario. Unfortunately, the issue is that I don't necessarily know if Bol Bol has a defensive awareness. He has the intangibles and obviously the size, but I don't know if he has the overall wherewithal defensively to be as effective as Jonathan Isaac is on that side of the ball. Yeah, he has more of an offensive upside than Jonathan. It's one of those things where I'm a bit split down the middle because I don't feel super crazy about Jonathan either given his price tag. So it's one of those things where I can't really blame you, but I understand it. You actually followed up with a comment that I was kind of looking into off podcast, but we can talk about it now, which is that we should have picked up Dennis Schroeder. Dennis Schroeder is somebody that he plays for Sacramento as well. Ironically, we talked about Malik Monk and Keon Ellis. Dennis Schroeder is ironically somebody else that I think is going to be a pretty easy get on the trade block this season. I think that the Sacramento Kings are going to lean very heavily into the idea of this fire sale. That it's probably going to start with, if they're going to move anybody, it's going to start with Domantas Sabonis. I think that's going to set the precedent for everything else as far as a fire sale is concerned. If they move off Domantas, they're moving everyone else. Simple as that. And when I say moving everybody else, I think they're going to move all the people that don't necessarily align with what they want to do long term. Obviously, with Russell Westbrook, he signed on a 1-year deal. You keep him so he can be an expiring contract that falls off your books at the end of the year. But you move off of DeMar DeRozan, who still has 2 more years under contract. You move off of Zach LaVine, who probably still has some decent value at best, where you can maybe get at least a first-round draft pick for him. You move off of Domantas Sabonis, who still has, an All-NBA appearance next to his name in a Sacramento Kings jersey. You move off of him. But also, that goes deeper than that. That means you have to consider the idea of moving off of somebody like Dennis Schroeder, who unfortunately has played on like 1 million teams within the last year and a half. Unfortunately, he might end up playing for another one. But you have to look at what this team might want to do moving forward, right? They have Murray. They have Devin Carter. I believe they also drafted a guard. They drafted a guard in this most recent draft as well. I want to confirm that to be sure, but because I'm pretty sure, I'm pretty certain. Let me double check. Neat Clifford, yes, who also plays the shooting guard / small forward position as well. So if we're prioritizing Keegan Murray, Neat Clifford, Devin Carter, Maxime Reynaud is who they recently drafted out of Stanford in the second round this year. He would essentially be your quote unquote like short-term Domantas Sabonis replacement. I think that when you look at that roster, like the likelihood is that they would want to move off of somebody like Dennis Schroeder, and maybe the Orlando Magic can swoop in and grab him for a very cheap price. Maybe you're able to give them Jet, Jonathan, and a second for Dennis Schroeder. And maybe that's even a lot. Let me check what Dennis Schroeder's contract looks like, because that might actually be a little hefty. Because you may be able to get away with this by just by moving off of Jet Howard. It depends on how the money breaks down. So he's owed $14 million. You can honestly get away with doing this just by giving up Jonathan Isaac alone and maybe a second just to sweeten the deal. But you can maybe do this without even having to move off of Jet Howard and save him for something else later. As far as pairing him up in something, some other kind of trade. So I think Dennis Schroeder would like work. I mean, the synergy between him and Franz is obviously, more than clear there. They're coming off of a championship in Eurobasket. That momentum, I think, when they play next to each other, could really elevate this team in a real way. There's already real German presence on this team. Franz, Mo, Tristan. You just add another guy from that team. Obviously, Mo didn't play, but you had another guy from that national team in Dennis Schroeder to the team. I think it could really work. I think it would also put a further emphasis on the fact that like this Orlando Magic team genuinely believes in Franz as a cornerstone piece moving forward. You guys were really active, so I'll kind of go through these last little bit of comments real quick. I'll do two more. Let's say Tyus is a problem. JC_88 says Tyus is a problem. I don't know why Mosley ran him so much just to lose the lead. He literally provides nothing. It is getting to that. It is getting to a point with Tyus where we have to really wonder whether or not he's washed. I hate saying that because, again, big Tyus Jones stand for all of those that are not familiar with this podcast. Very big Tyus Jones stand, but at the same time, got to be honest, it's looking wicked right now. It's looking really, really bad in terms of him not being able to shoot the three ball. He's not providing any kind of real passing acumen, and he's not even really setting up plays in a way that's helping guys like get open looks and efficient opportunities on the bench, like coming off the bench. Like it's just not looking like good basketball for Tyus right now. And I think that's why you have to think about a Dennis Schroeder. That's why you have to think about a Malik Monk. You have to think about these kind of guys as potential options, because it's not just about trying to add somebody off the bench to add some kind of scoring. Honestly, it's kind of finding a way to take away the minutes from Tyus as well. So maybe that's another guy that maybe the Sacramento Kings will be willing to take, is Jet Howard and like Tyus Jones as like a salary cap sweetener, where you have Jet, who you can maybe bring back on a lucrative deal because he's under, he's gonna go into unrestricted free. I mean, he's gonna go into restricted free agency this upcoming summer potentially. I think it's either this summer or next summer. And Tyus Jones falls directly off your books. Maybe you can get the high upside of Jet Howard as a 3-point shooter with just maybe needing a change of scenery, and somebody like Tyus Jones who you can bring in the locker room, be a veteran voice, but be somebody that also falls off at the end of the season as far as his contract's concerned, and kind of move forward after that. Last but not least, you had two pretty dense comments. So I'm only gonna read the first one because that one's a little bit longer. So this is from El Kabai F4Q, and he says, when people say Wagner is better or more important than Becerra, I think what they see in Wagner is quickly scoring in first quarters when defense isn't set, and he scores in transition, piling up points quickly in the first half. Then, just like the playoffs, when defenses tighten up in the second half and they're not as much transition offense or fast pace, that's when Wagner turns the ball over and gets his shot blocked. Notice just about all his points come in the first half, especially in first quarters. Wagner's fans think Banchero takes opportunities from Wagner in second halves, not realizing Wagner is at his best in transition or screen plays once defenses tighten up and the game slows down. He resorts to taking long step back threes, same thing he did against the Hornets. It's just that in that game, he made them. Wagner does the same thing every game, around 20 in the first half, 5 in the second half, and his fans think the team actually goes from him when in reality goes through him, I guess, from when in reality it's his style which is made for fast pace that don't work against tight defenses, more like the playoffs. If y'all keenly watch Wagner stays from the ball in tight spots, he knows that not his time, while most of you think Banchero is the one taking from him. At fast pace, Wagner might be top 3 in the league against good defense that won't allow him to space to opportunity. He is top 70. If he learns to play against crowded defense, he will definitely be one of the best in the league. He's already one of the best in speed tempo. So I'm assuming the long-winded way of summarizing, or the short-winded way of summarizing everything you said there, is that this is in response to what we were talking about as Paulo Banchero was out in that game against Houston. Franz Wagner was practically a no-show, 0-7 down the stretch in the fourth quarter and overtime in that game against the Houston Rockets, where they lost, where a lot of the offense seemed like it was falling on putback dunks and Anthony Black and Tristan da Silva making big shots down the stretch. And with that being the case, it stirs the question of, when we have these arguments against Paulo Banchero and his ability to slow down the offense and kind of, manipulate things where it feels like other guys aren't involved and things of that nature. He's saying that Franz Wagner is a big contributor to why Paulo Banchero has to do that, especially down the stretch, because it seems like Franz is one of those guys that has to start fast and get all of his points up on the board early, because when the game gets close down the stretch, things become a lot more difficult for him. Now, obviously, as a 6'9" ball handler, somebody that doesn't have elite level ball handling ability, when the game gets tighter and the defense collapse, that alone is going to make it much more difficult for someone of his size to be able to create offense at the same kind of level. He's not Kevin Durant. He's not somebody that you would consider as this, jumbo wing where his number one asset is to be a ball handler, right? Franz falls into a very similar category of Amin Thompson or Cooper Flagg right now, is the jumbo wing type that has enough of a handle for you to trust him to bring the ball up the floor, to initiate offense, but maybe not somebody that in a phone booth you would want to be trying to create down the stretch with the game on the line, right? It's one of those things where it becomes a really big struggle in terms of them trying to get their own shot without it being something associated with getting to the rim, getting downhill, because they don't have a tight enough handle where you can expect them to go through 1, 2, 3 screen actions and create an off the dribble opportunity where they're able to get, points at ease. They don't have that in their bag right now. And it's one of those things that does limit them, especially down the stretch. Paulo's physicality, although he doesn't have the tightest handle, his physicality and ability to get to the rim using his back to the basket skill and his touch around the rim within 8 feet is what makes him so dangerous down the stretch of games, because you can slow as the game slows down. Paulo thrives within that both slow and physical environment. I think that's been I think that's reflected in the pushback between Paulo and this new up-tempo play style, is that he actually thrives best when they play slow. Franz thrives best when they play fast. So you have to find an equilibrium in the middle of that. I think the perfect equilibrium of that is that Franz starts the game off really hot through the first 2 quarters, first 2.5 quarters. He gets the ball rolling, and then you have somebody like Paulo, who I think in a game like that one against Houston could have really been helpful in terms of bringing the game home, especially against a physical Houston Rockets defense that has Steven Adams, Alperen Sengun, Jabari Smith, and all those guys on the floor. So I think that's where, when we have these questions about whether or not Franz Wagner and Paulo Banchero can fit next to each other, these are the kind of conversations you have to have, is the yin and yang aspect of these two actually can be just as helpful as the idea of them both being completely on the same page. The fact that they both have such a different philosophy around how they're able to be the most successful offensively is actually, I think, what makes this team so lethal when they're both clicking, because that puts them in a position where they can give you both versions. And when the game is over, they both finish with 25 plus, and you're like, yo, that was a rough night. And I don't even know which style of basketball we got beat by because they both went crazy. So, yeah. Shout out to everybody for dropping comments in this comment section down below. You guys are some very intelligent Orlando Magic fans, and I love reading you guys' comments because I love intelligent basketball. So continue to drop them in the comment section down below. This podcast is already 50 minutes long. I hope you guys stayed to the end. Shout out to you if you did. And drop down, comment Schroeder to Orlando if you got this far. Comment Schroeder to Orlando if you got this far in the podcast. Shout out to you guys if you did. With all that being said, remember to like, comment, and subscribe for daily Orlando Magic content. Again, we are on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Trying to see if we can get it done before 2026, man. So I would love it if you guys hit that post notification bell so you always know when we're dropping new videos. And until next time, I'll see you guys later. Peace.